Our next presenter today is Sam Zink. Sam is a double major in environmental studies and history with a minor in diversity. She's graduating in the winter of 2023. She's pursuing a degree with honors in environmental studies and has been on the dean's list for 2 consecutive years. That's 6 full quarters. She also worked at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute as a technician for the TEDdy project. That's the environmental determinants of type 1 diabetes in the young. Today, she'll be talking about birds as indicators of habitat quality in the face of climate change. She worked for Washington State's Department of Natural Resources. Her site supervisor there was Dr. Teddy Minkova, and her faculty advisor is our very own Tim Billow, Dr. Tim Billow. So, without further ado, let's turn it over to Sam. Sam, can you hear us clearly?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Technology is always funny. I have a question for you. Do you ever find yourself needing an escape? Life is just too much. I have needed an escape many times when studying climate change. I distract myself in reality TV. The Kardashians in particular, for a binge period of time, act as my eco-anxiety therapy. Reality TV gives me and us a pretend world to live in for at least in an episode amount of time. Now we're going to shift topics a little bit, but we'll come back to this. Here is a northern spotted owl. That is an indicator species. Now, an indicator species is an organism that is used as a proxy for a particular environmental condition within a particular ecosystem, normally for the health of the ecosystem. Now, let's get even more specific and talk about songbirds as indicator species. Songbirds are great indicator species because they are very vocal in telling you that they don't like you, and in defending their breeding ground. They occupy a broad range of habitats, eat a variety of food, have a high conservation priority, and can be monitored inconspicuously, and sometimes have dance battles, apparently. Now, I want to go into more detail about that last reason. My host organization, the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, is currently conducting a study in which they are using songbirds as indicator species. Their study is testing how forest management practices affect the health of the old growth ecosystems, using songbirds as their proxy. They did this by using passive acoustic monitoring, which you can see in this picture is putting up a recording device and leaving it and letting the birds do the rest of the work. Now, my internship duties were to get these collected audio samples and turn them into a sonogram such as this one. From there, I both audibly and visually validated the calls of all 10 indicator species in DNR's study. And here you can see the tagging of a Pacific slope flycatcher's call. Now, this leads into my research question. How has the migratory patterns of the Pacific slope flycatcher and or the orange-crowned warbler shifted? And now, to discuss my results in a style close to our hearts, without further ado, welcome to the bird slur. For my research, I picked 2 out of the 10 birds in the study and did a risk assessment of which species would have a higher propensity to fall victim to climate change. The final rose winner being the bird that is more suited for adaptation. Our mansion for this episode is the beautiful maritime coniferous forest of the Olympic Peninsula, located on the upper western side of Washington State. Lush and natural, these old growth forests are high in biodiversity and resilience. Now let's meet our contestants. On our left, we have the on the right, we have the Pacific slope flycatcher, and on the left, we have the orange-crowned warbler. That's the orange circle. Now, here behind, you can hear their songs looping. The first high trill is the orange-crowned warbler, and the cat call-esh kind of whoop whoop is the Pacific slope flycatcher. Now, here are the bird's current ranges. We see that the orange-crowned warbler has a much broader range than the Pacific slope flycatcher. But what happens when we add 3 degrees to our current climate? Well, we can expect the orange-crowned warbler to lose 63% of its current summer range, and the Pacific slope flycatcher is going to lose about 24%. Now, it seems as though the Pacific slope flycatcher is in the lead based on these facts, but let's consider some more before the final rose. After conducting my research, I found that neither bird's migratory patterns have shifted yet, but we can expect them to shift in the next 10 to 20 years. So, drum roll. And the final rose goes to climate change. I mean, I guess we should have not been surprised. Climate change is the most dramatic environmental issue of our generation. No matter what, many species will fail at adapting to a radically shifting climate as ours is doing. Now, at the post-rose ceremony interview, let's discuss what this all means. Climate change winning the rose means that the reliability of indicator species in the future is now uncertain. These are ecosystem services the environment does for humans free of cost and that we have been dependent on and relied on for a while. And now that's up in the air. So ergo, we need continual research on this topic. DNR and other agencies need to continue to monitor the Olympic Peninsula as their mitigation efforts are paramount in sustaining the Pacific Northwest old growth forests and ecosystems. We all look for distractions to escape from this hellish future, reality TV show or not, but this is our reality and we must act now to change it. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Birchler. I am your host, Sam Zink, and I bid you a good night.
All right, questions for Sam? Questions for Sam from the audience? Yes, Angela.
What made you choose those 2 out of the 10 indicators songbird species?
Great question. So actually, out of the 10 birds, only 3 were migratory. So it was pretty easy. How I decided was because you saw that their ranges were pretty similar, but their nesting behaviors were different. So I thought that would be a really good comparison because the orange-crowned warbler nests on the ground in shrubs, while the Pacific slope flycatcher likes to nest up in Douglas firs about 15 to 20 feet in the air. So it was for that similarity and difference kind of comparison within my risk assessment.
Great. Other questions for Sam? Have a question back here? Yes.
Can she hear me?
I think she can.
Okay. Did you consider running any other climate simulations for other degrees of warming and comparing the migration loss?
Great. Did you hear that, Sam?
I think so. I actually looked at multiple different climate predictions. I looked at one for the Olympic Peninsula. I looked at a hydrology prediction. I looked at those photos you saw were from Audubon, which is this really cool bird website for bird nerds. But I actually ended up looking at 5 different climate prediction models and kind of comparatively, lace them over to kind of get an idea of what the climate's going to look like, and use that to kind of decide, which bird is more F'd or, just, did that make sense? Did I answer the question?
Is that a technical term? No comment. Sam, so another question, this one coming from the internet. This is being done for songbirds in the Olympic Peninsula using passive acoustic monitoring. Is DNR using any other sort of indicator species besides songbirds, or is that kind of where they're focusing right now?
So for the study that I worked on, only using songbirds as indicators. So just for that particular study, because they're using passive acoustic monitoring. So I'm sure that there might be another study out there that they're using different indicator species, but for my site supervisor's own study, they just were using songbirds.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one in the back.
Are there any other factors that are affecting the songbirds' migratory patterns, such as light pollution?
Did you hear that?
Okay, yeah. So the cool thing about migratory patterns is they're super complex, and scientists don't actually, we have ideas why they do it, but we kind of still don't know. There's a kind of a magnetic part of it where they just kind of get up and leave. Normally they migrate because of lack of resources. So they leave, in the winter months to go to their summer months because that's when insects kind of kick up. It's also a change in temperature. It's just an innate thing within the birds. It's instinctive. They're just oh, it's time to leave today. So I looked at a range of factors within, the pattern. Is their food resources changing? Are their favorite, trees changing in the Pacific Northwest? And I found that none of it's really a problem right now. We're all good, but in 10 to 20 years, it's going to hit the fan. And so that's why it's important to start now before everything kind of falls apart.
All this technical jargon. Thank you so much. Let's give it up.